The wind carried the sharp tang of diesel and damp earth as I pulled into the precinct parking lot, my boots crunching on the gravel. It was early October in Mill Creek, Ohio, and the air had that crisp edge that made you feel alive, even if you were bone-tired from a double shift. I was 32, a detective with 8 years on the force, living in a small house on the edge of town I'd bought after my divorce. My ex, Sarah, had taken our dog and moved to Cincinnati, leaving me with a mortgage and a quiet that felt heavier than it should. The job was my anchor, paperwork, interviews, the occasional burglary to solve. But lately, it was starting to fray at the edges. I'd grown up in Mill Creek, knew its rhythms like the back of my hand. The town was small, maybe 5,000 people, with a main street of faded storefronts and a diner that hadn't changed its menu since I was a kid. My partner, Lena, was younger, 27, sharp as a tack but green, still learning to trust her gut over protocol. We'd been paired up for a year, and I liked her. She didn't fill silences with chatter, and she noticed things others missed. That week, we were working a string of petty thefts, nothing serious, just enough to keep us busy. But it was the call about the missing person that changed everything. Mrs. Clara Henshaw, 64, hadn't been seen in 3 days. Her neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Ed, called it in, said she hadn't picked up her mail or walked her terrier, Rusty, which wasn't like her. Clara was a widow, lived alone in a tidy bungalow on Maple Street, the kind of place with lace curtains and a front yard full of marigolds. I knew her vaguely. She'd bring cookies to the station at Christmas, always asked after my mom, who'd been her friend before Mom passed. Lena and I drove out that morning, the sky gray and heavy, like it was holding its breath. Clara's house looked normal from the outside, the grass clipped, the porch swept clean. The front door was locked, no signs of a break-in. Ed met us out front, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, his face creased with worry. He said he'd knocked yesterday, got no answer, and noticed Rusty barking inside, which wasn't usual. Clara never left the dog alone for long. I jimmied the back door, a trick I'd learned from years of dealing with old locks, and we stepped inside, calling Clara's name. The house smelled of lavender and stale coffee, the kind of scent that lingers in a place where someone's lived alone for years. Rusty was in the kitchen, his water bowl empty, his food untouched. He whimpered when he saw us, tail wagging but eyes nervous. We searched the house top to bottom. Clara's bed was made, her dishes washed, her purse still on the counter with her keys and wallet inside. Nothing looked disturbed. No overturned furniture, no blood, no signs of a struggle. But something felt off, like the air was too still, the way it gets when you walk into a room someone just left. Lena noticed it too, her brow furrowing as she scanned the living room. She pointed out a photo frame on the mantel, one of those silver ones with a picture of Clara and her late husband, turned slightly, like someone had picked it up and set it down wrong. It wasn't much, but it stuck with me. We talked to Ed again, and he mentioned Clara had been acting strange the last week, quieter, checking her windows more often, like she was expecting someone. He thought maybe she was just lonely, but he'd seen her standing in her backyard at night, staring at the alley that ran behind the houses. I made a note to check the alley, and we let Rusty out, fed him, and locked up. Back at the station, we pulled Clara's phone records and found nothing unusual, just calls to her sister in Toledo and the local pharmacy. No criminal record, no debts, no enemies, just a woman who'd vanished. That night, I couldn't sleep. The quiet in my house felt wrong, like it was pressing in on me. I kept thinking about Clara, about that photo frame, about the alley. Around midnight, I grabbed my jacket and drove to Maple Street, telling myself I was just following a hunch. The alley was narrow, barely wide enough for a garbage truck, lined with sagging fences and overgrown shrubs. I parked at one end and walked it, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The air smelled of wet leaves and something sharper, like metal or rust. Halfway down, I found a spot where the gravel was scuffed, like someone had been pacing or dragging something. No footprints, no tire marks, just a patch of disturbed ground that made my skin prickle. I stood there, listening, the town asleep around me. A faint sound came from the far end of the alley, a soft thud, like a door closing. I moved toward it, my hand near my holster, my heart picking up speed. The sound didn't come again, but I felt it. That same sense from Clara's house, like I wasn't alone. I checked the backyards along the alley, shining my light over fences, but found nothing. No one hiding, no signs of Clara. Just that scuffed gravel and the echo of that thud in my head. The next day, Lena and I went back to the neighborhood, knocking on doors. Most folks hadn't seen Clara in days, but a guy 2 houses down, a mechanic named Tom, said he'd noticed a car idling in the alley a few nights back. No plates visible, just a dark sedan that drove off when he stepped outside. He couldn't say if it was connected, but it was enough to make us dig deeper. We put out a bulletin for Clara, checked local hospitals, and started pulling traffic cam footage from nearby streets. Nothing turned up. No car matching Tom's description, no sign of Clara. Days turned into a week, and the case started to weigh on me. I'd drive by Maple Street on my way home, slow down at the alley, my eyes scanning the shadows. Lena noticed I was off, asked if I was okay, but I brushed it off, said it was just the job. She didn't push, but I could tell she was watching me closer, like she knew something was eating at me. One night, I went back to the alley alone. No flashlight this time, just standing in the dark, listening. The thud came again, fainter, like it was coming from under the ground. I froze, my breath shallow, telling myself it was a pipe or a sewer grate settling. But it didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate, like something, or someone, wanted me to hear it. I started checking the alley every night, telling myself I was being thorough. But it was more than that. I couldn't stop thinking about Clara, about what might have happened in that alley, about why she'd been staring into it. I pulled her phone records again, went through her sister's statements, even checked the pharmacy logs. Nothing. But the more I looked, the more I noticed small things. Neighbors saying they'd heard odd noises, not just Clara's thumping but faint hums, like an engine idling, or footsteps that stopped when they got too close. None of it was solid, just whispers of something wrong. Lena and I searched the alley together one afternoon, the sky spitting rain. We found nothing new, just that same scuffed patch of gravel, now muddy and harder to read. She asked if I thought Clara had wandered off, maybe gotten confused, but I didn't buy it. Clara was sharp, not the type to get lost. I mentioned the thud, the one I'd heard at night, and Lena gave me a look. Not skeptical, but careful, like she was trying to gauge how far I was taking this. She suggested we set up a camera, one of those motion-activated ones, to catch anything moving in the alley. I agreed, but part of me didn't want to know what it might show. The camera went up the next day, mounted on a utility pole. For 2 nights, it caught nothing but stray by. The lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the precinct's front desk as I sorted through a stack of reports. It was just past 1 a.m. in our small Iowa town, the kind of place where the biggest crimes were bar fights or kids spray painting the water tower. I'd been a cop here for 12 years, long enough to know every street and most of the faces, but the night shift still wore me down. My boots stuck slightly to the linoleum floor, the air heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and old paper. The rest of the station was quiet. Jim, the dispatcher, was dozing in the break room, and the other 2 officers were out patrolling the empty roads. I was alone, organizing case files to keep my mind off the ache in my shoulders and the fact that I hadn't seen my daughter, Sophie, awake in days. Sophie was 8, living with me full-time since her mom, Laura, moved to Des Moines 3 years ago for a job. I'd promised myself I'd be there for her, make up for the years Laura and I spent fighting over my long hours, but the night shift meant I was gone when she went to bed and barely awake when she left for school. I'd leave notes on the fridge, reminders to eat her breakfast, little doodles to make her smile, but it wasn't enough. I kept a photo of her on my desk, her gap-toothed grin from last summer's fair. and it grounded me when the job felt like too much. Tonight, though, the precinct felt heavier than usual, the hum of the lights louder, like a mosquito you can't swat away. I was halfway through a vandalism report when I noticed a faint glow spilling up the stairwell from the basement. We kept evidence and old case files down there, in a damp, concrete room lined with metal shelves. No one went down unless they had to. The place smelled like mildew, and the single bare bulb gave off a weak, yellowish light. I figured someone had left it on, maybe Jim during a coffee-fueled filing spree. I grabbed my flashlight, more out of habit than necessity, and headed down the narrow stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The air grew cooler, sharper, the mildew smell stronger as I reached the bottom. The bulb hung from a cord in the center of the room, glowing dimly, swaying slightly as if someone had brushed past it. I swept my flashlight across the shelves, boxes of files, sealed evidence bags, a few rusted filing cabinets, empty, no one around. I flicked the switch off, the bulb going dark with a soft pop. The silence was immediate, broken only by the drip of a pipe somewhere in the walls. I turned to head back up, but halfway up the stairs I heard a click, sharp and deliberate, like a light switch flipping. I stopped, my hand on the railing, and looked back. The bulb was on again, its glow casting long shadows across the concrete. My heart gave a quick thud, but I told myself it was just a faulty switch, common in a building this old. I went back down, flipped it off again, and waited, watching the bulb. It stayed dark. I climbed the stairs, the echo of my boots louder now, and got back to my desk, brushing it off as one of those quirks of the precinct, like the leaky faucet in the break room. But the next night, it happened again. I was alone, sorting through a pile of traffic citations, the fluorescent lights flickering enough to make my eyes ache. The basement glow caught my attention, faint but unmistakable, spilling up the stairwell. I sighed, figuring the wiring was shot, and went down to check. The bulb was on, swaying slightly, the room as empty as before. I turned it off, waited a moment, and headed back up. Before I reached the top, that click came again, and the light flared back on. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Old buildings, bad wiring, I repeated in my head. I went down, checked the switch. It looked fine, no loose wires, and turned it off again. This time, I stood there, flashlight in hand, watching the bulb for a full minute. It stayed off, but the air felt heavier, like the room was holding its breath. I checked the shelves, the corners, even behind the cabinets. Nothing, just the drip of that pipe and the faint smell of damp concrete. Back at my desk, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about Sophie, how she'd asked me last week if I ever got scared on the job. I'd laughed, told her the scariest thing was paperwork, but the truth was, I'd seen enough to know fear wasn't always rational. My dad had been a cop too, back in Cedar Rapids, and he'd warned me about letting the job get in your head. He'd retired early, burned out, and I didn't want that for me, not when Sophie needed me. I glanced at her photo, her smile a reminder to keep it together. But when I reached for my pen, it wasn't where I'd left it. It was on the other side of the desk, next to my notebook, which was open to a blank page I didn't remember flipping to. I froze, my pulse quickening. I'd been alone all night, Jim still snoring in the break room. I told myself I was just tired, misplacing things, but my gut said otherwise. The next shift, I got to the precinct early, before the others arrived. The basement light was off, the stairwell dark, but I checked anyway, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Everything was in place, files, evidence, cabinets. I tested the switch, flipping it on and off a few times. It worked fine. No clicks, no flickering. I even called the town's electrician, who said he'd checked the wiring but didn't sound concerned. That night I stayed at my desk, trying to focus on reports, but my eyes kept drifting to the stairwell. Around 2 a.m., the glow appeared again, faint but steady. I didn't want to go down, but I couldn't ignore it. Sophie's school play was coming up, and I'd promised to be there, awake and present, not distracted by some stupid light. I grabbed my flashlight and descended, the stairs creaking louder than before. The bulb was on, swaying gently, though there was no draft. I turned it off, my hand lingering on the switch, and waited. Silence. Then that click, and the light snapped back on. My heart jumped, my flashlight beam shaking as I swept the room. Empty as always. But as I turned to leave, I felt it. A cold breeze on the back of my neck, like someone exhaling just behind me. I spun around, my hand brushing my sidearm, but no one was there. The air was still. The bulb steady now, its glow harsh against the concrete walls. I backed up the stairs, my boots loud, my breath uneven. At my desk, I noticed my pen was gone, replaced by a paperclip bent into a tiny, perfect circle, sitting exactly where the pen had been. I didn't sleep much after that. At home, I'd check on Sophie, her small form curled under the covers, her room filled with the soft glow of a nightlight. I'd sit in the kitchen, coffee going cold, thinking about Laura, how she'd left because I was never really there, even when I was home. I'd promised Sophie I'd do better, be the dad she deserved, but the precinct was getting to me. I started checking the basement every shift, sometimes finding the light on, sometimes not. Each time it felt like the room was waiting, the mildew smell stronger, the drip of the pipe louder. I noticed more things moving on my desk. A notepad shifted, a stapler turned sideways, always small, always deliberate. I asked Jim if he'd been messing with my stuff, but he just laughed, said he barely had energy to stay awake, let alone play pranks. One night, alone again, I was filing reports when the basement glow appeared, brighter than before. The fluorescent lights above me flickered, their buzz louder, like a swarm of insects. I went down, my flashlight steady, my heart pounding. The bulb was on, but this time it flickered in a slow, deliberate rhythm. On, off, like a signal. I stood there, frozen, the air cold and heavy, the mildew smell sharp in my nose. Then, that breeze again, colder, brushing the back of my neck, raising the hairs on my arms. I turned, expecting nothing, but my flashlight caught something. A shadow, brief and formless, darting behind a shelf. I called out, my voice sharp, identifying myself as police. But the room stayed silent, the bulb still flickering. I checked every corner, every box, my hands shaking as I moved evidence bags aside. Nothing. I turned off the bulb, the click loud in the quiet, and ran up the stairs, locking the basement door behind me, a lock we never used. Back at my desk, my notebook was open again, the paperclip gone, replaced by my pen, its tip bent slightly, like it had been pressed too hard. I didn't tell anyone, not Jim, not the captain. What would I say? That the basement was haunted by a light bulb? That someone was moving my things? I started avoiding the basement, letting Jim handle evidence runs, but I'd still see that glow some nights, spilling up the stairs like an invitation. I kept working, kept showing up for Sophie's school events, her play, her soccer games, but I was distracted, checking my desk every hour, listening for that click. At home, I'd lock the doors twice, check the windows, make sure Sophie was safe. The electrician came, said the wiring was old but fine, no explanation for the bulb. I even pulled old case files, thinking maybe a disgruntled arrestee was sneaking in, but nothing lined up. No break-ins, no suspects with a grudge. The precinct felt different now. The fluorescent lights harsher, the air thicker. I still go down to the basement when I have to, but I don't linger, and I keep my flashlight on, its beam steady. The bulb still flickers sometimes, and my desk still isn't quite right, but I don't look behind me anymore, not when I feel that breeze. The streetlights cast a weak glow through the fog as I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building in Milwaukee, the patrol car's engine ticking as it cooled. It was just past 3 a.m., and the August air was thick, heavy with the smell of wet asphalt and the faint tang of garbage from the alley nearby. I'd been a patrol officer for 10 years, working the night shift in a city that could be as quiet as a small town or as chaotic as a bar brawl, depending on the hour. Tonight had been a grind. 2 traffic stops, a shoplifting call at a 24-hour convenience store, and a mountain of paperwork that left my eyes burning and my shoulders knotted. All I wanted was to crash, to sink into my bed and forget the world for a few hours. But sleep hadn't been kind to me lately. Not since the job took more than I could give. Not since it took Nate. I trudged up the stairs to my 4th-floor apartment, the hallway's fluorescent lights flickering with a faint buzz, like a dying insect trapped in a jar. My boots stuck to the worn linoleum, each step echoing in the quiet, the sound bouncing off the peeling paint on the walls. My place was a mess. Takeout boxes stacked on the counter, a pile of laundry spilling over the couch, my duty belt slung over a chair, its weight pulling the fabric taut. I didn't bother tidying up, just kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the bed, the mattress creaking under me like an old ship. The ceiling fan spun slowly, its hum blending with the distant drone of traffic on the street below, a low pulse that never quite stopped. I closed my eyes, hoping for a few hours of rest, but my body had other plans. It started like it always did, a heaviness, like sinking into quicksand, my limbs locked, my chest tight, my breath shallow. Paralysis del sueño, the doctor had called it, a side effect of long shifts and stress. It had been happening for months, ever since Nate, my best friend and partner of 5 years, took a bullet during a botched raid last year, his blood staining the pavement as I tried to keep him talking, his voice fading as the ambulance lights flashed in the distance. At first, the paralysis was just that, being stuck, unable to move, staring at the ceiling as my heart pounded, the room dark except for the faint glow of streetlights seeping through the blinds. I'd see vague shapes in the corners, shadows that flickered like smoke, and hear a low buzz, like a fan with a loose blade, vibrating in my skull. I'd wake up gasping, my shirt damp with sweat, telling myself it was just my brain misfiring, a trick of exhaustion. But lately, the episodes had gotten worse, more vivid, like the darkness was taking shape, growing claws. That night, as the paralysis took hold, the room felt colder, the fan's hum slowing to a deep, uneven drone, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. My eyes darted to the corner by the dresser, where a shadow pulsed, darker than the rest, not just a blur, but something solid, tall and hunched, with long, thin fingers that seemed to graze the hardwood floor. My heart slammed against my ribs, the buzz in my ears growing louder, now a faint whisper, like static trying to form words, slithering through the air. The figure moved, gliding closer, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its face a smudge except for 2 glowing points. Eyes, like headlights cutting through fog, locked onto me with a weight that pinned me harder than the paralysis itself. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, my breath shallow and ragged, caught in my throat like a trapped animal. The figure stopped at the edge of my bed, its fingers twitching, curling like they were reaching for something just out of sight. The whispers sharpened, almost my name, repeated in a low, uneven chant that sent chills down my spine. A pressure settled on my chest, heavier than usual, like a cold hand pressing down, sinking into my skin, its chill spreading through my veins. Then, with a jolt, I was free, gasping, my hands clawing at the sheets, my shirt soaked through. The room was empty, the fan still spinning lazily, the street outside quiet except for a distant car alarm wailing in the night. I checked the clock, 3:42 a.m. Only minutes had passed, though it felt like hours. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face, my reflection pale in the dim light, eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. As I turned back to the bedroom, I noticed something. A faint scratch on the wooden bed frame, 3 thin lines, like something had scraped it with a nail or a blade. I hadn't seen it before, but the apartment was old, full of marks from past tenants, scuffs and dents that told stories I didn't know. I told myself it was nothing, just my eyes playing tricks, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I gripped the sink. The next night, I got home later, around 4 a.m., after a call about a disturbance at a bar downtown, a couple of drunks arguing over a spilled drink. My head throbbed, my body begging for rest, but I dreaded, closing my eyes, knowing what waited. I sat on the couch, the TV on low, some late-night talk show I wasn't watching, its laughter tinny and distant. When I finally dragged myself to bed, the paralysis hit almost immediately, faster than before, like it was waiting for me. The shadow was there, clearer now, its long fingers curling at its sides, its glowing eyes brighter, unblinking, burning into me. The buzz was louder, the whispers distinct, my name repeated in a slow, mocking cadence that seemed to echo inside my skull. The pressure on my chest was worse, like ice spreading through my veins, and I felt a cold breath on my face, sharp and real, like someone leaning close, their presence heavy in the dark. When I snapped out of it, my throat raw from gasping, I saw my bedroom door was ajar, though I'd locked it before bed. The bolt turned back as if by an unseen hand. I checked the apartment, flashlight in hand, my sidearm still locked in its safe in the closet. Nothing was out of place, but the air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a storm, with a faint smell of ozone lingering, like after a lightning strike. I started avoiding sleep, downing coffee at the precinct, my hands jittery as I filled out reports in the break room's harsh light, the fluorescent bulbs buzzing like the whispers in my dreams. I thought about Nate, how he'd always been the one to keep me grounded, cracking jokes during stakeouts, his laugh cutting through the tension like a knife. He'd been more than a partner. Family. The kind you choose. The kind you'd take a bullet for. Losing him in that raid, watching him bleed out on the pavement while I radioed for help, his hand going limp in mine, broke something in me that hadn't healed. My sister Ellie had noticed it, calling from Chicago every week, her voice tight with worry, asking if I was eating, if I was okay. She'd begged me to see a therapist, to talk about Nate, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, couldn't put words to the hole he'd left. I hadn't told her about the paralysis, the shadows, didn't want her thinking I was cracking under the pressure of the job. But the episodes were eating at me, making me question what was real, what was just my mind unraveling. I checked the precinct's records, looking for reports of break-ins or prowlers in my neighborhood, thinking maybe someone was messing with me, a disgruntled suspect from a past arrest. There'd been a few burglaries, small-time stuff, electronics, cash, but nothing near my building, no suspects who'd target a cop's apartment. I walked the hallway outside my place, checking for signs of tampering, but the locks were solid, the windows secure, the fire escape rusted but untouched. I thought about the raid, how it had gone wrong so fast, how Nate had pushed me out of the way, taking the shot meant for me. The guilt was a weight, heavier than the paralysis, and it followed me into every corner of my life, into the dark of my apartment. The third night I tried staying awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, its bitter steam curling in the air. The TV's glow flickered across the room, some infomercial about knives that could cut through anything, its pitchman's voice grating. But exhaustion won, and I drifted off, my head slumping onto my arms, only to wake in paralysis again. The figure was closer, leaning over me, its fingers inches from my face, long and thin, twitching like they were alive on their own. The whispers were loud now, my name repeated in a low, guttural chant that seemed to vibrate in my bones. The pressure on my chest was crushing, the cold breath sharper, like ice on my skin, so close I could feel its rhythm. When I broke free, gasping, my bedside lamp was on, though I hadn't touched it, its light casting harsh shadows across the room. I checked the apartment, my flashlight beam shaking, and found a glass in the sink, tipped over, a faint smudge on its rim, like a fingerprint that wasn't mine. I hadn't used it, hadn't even been in the kitchen that night, but there it was, glinting under the fluorescent light. I called in sick the next day, a first in years, my voice hoarse over the phone as I lied about a cold. I went to the hardware store, bought new deadbolts, and installed them myself. The drills whined cutting through the quiet of the afternoon, my hands steadying as I worked. I checked the building's security footage, but the hallway camera was old, grainy, showing nothing but shadows moving in the flicker of the lights. No clear shapes, no faces. I called the landlord, asked if anyone had access to my apartment, a maintenance guy, a former tenant, but he said no, the place was mine alone, his voice annoyed at the question. I thought about telling Ellie, but what could I say? That I was seeing things in my sleep? That my apartment felt like someone else's? That the shadows were following me even when I was awake? I started keeping my sidearm closer, still locked, but within reach, and slept with the lights on, the fan off to avoid that buzz that echoed the whispers. I went back to work, kept patrolling the streets, kept my head down, but the precinct felt different. The radio's static sharper, like it was trying to speak, like it knew my name. The paralysis kept coming, the figure closer each time, its whispers louder, its eyes burning into me, unblinking. Sometimes in the quiet of the precinct, I'd hear a faint buzz, like a voice just out of reach, and I'd check the corners, half expecting to see those long fingers reaching out from the dark. My apartment's locks are new, the windows secure, but I don't feel alone anymore. Not when the lights are off, not when I close my eyes. The July heat pressed down on Mill Creek, Ohio, heavy and unyielding, the kind that made my police uniform stick to my skin as I walked my usual route along Main Street. I was 29, 6 years into the job, living alone in a cramped apartment above the hardware store. My parents had left for Florida 2 years prior, and I was the last Becker in town, tethered to this place by routine and a stubborn sense of duty. The town was quiet, always had been, save for the occasional bar fight or kids messing around at the old grain silo. My partner, Carl, a grizzled guy in his 50s with a bad knee, was stuck on desk duty after twisting his ankle, so I was pulling solo shifts. That morning, dispatch patched through a call from Mrs. Ellison, a widow who lived out by the edge of town. She sounded rattled, said she'd been hearing noises, low, steady thumps, coming from the empty lot behind her house near the old Parker property for 3 nights straight. She mentioned seeing a shadow move across the lot once, too, though she couldn't be sure what it was. I figured it was probably animals or some drifter camping out. The Parker place, a vacant lot now after the house burned down a decade ago, was just overgrown weeds and cracked concrete, but kids still used it as a shortcut or a place to smoke. Mrs. Ellison wasn't one for dramatics, so I grabbed my flashlight and drove out. The lot sat at the end of a gravel lane, flanked by tangled sumac and a ditch that reeked of stagnant water. I parked my cruiser and walked the rest of the way, the crunch of my boots loud in the still air. The sun was high, but the lot felt dim somehow, like the light didn't quite reach the ground. Weeds choked the cracked foundation where the house once stood, and a rusted chain-link fence sagged along one side. I scanned the area, expecting to find beer cans or cigarette butts, typical signs of kids. But there was nothing. Just dirt and weeds, and a faint, earthy smell that didn't sit right, like damp soil turned over too many times. I called out, my voice carrying across the open space. "Mill Creek PD, anyone out here?" No answer, just the hum of cicadas and the distant rumble of a truck on the highway. I moved deeper into the lot, checking the corners where the fence met the trees. That's when I noticed the ground. Parts of it looked disturbed, not like animal tracks, but like someone had been digging, then smoothed it over. It wasn't obvious, just patches where the dirt was too flat, too even, compared to the uneven clumps around it. I crouched, running my hand over one spot, and felt a slight give, like the soil wasn't packed tight. A sound stopped me, a faint thud, like a footfall, coming from the tree line at the back of the lot. I stood, hand resting near my holster, and squinted into the shadows. Nothing moved, but the air felt heavier now. The cicadas buzzed sharper. I told myself it was probably a deer or a stray dog, but my pulse was up, and I couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching. I walked toward the trees, my boots sinking slightly in the soft dirt, and called out again. "Police, show yourself." Silence, but the kind that feels like it's hiding something. I should have called it in, but Mill Creek's a small department. Backup was Carl limping over or waiting for a deputy from the next county. I kept moving, flashlight sweeping the underbrush, and found a narrow path leading into the woods. It wasn't a trail anyone maintained, just a worn strip where the weeds were trampled. The earthy smell was stronger here, mixed with something sharp, like rust or old metal. About 20 feet in, I found a clearing, maybe 10 by 10, with a patch of dirt that looked freshly turned. No tools, no tracks, just that same too smooth surface, like someone had been here and covered their work. My radio crackled, and I nearly jumped. Dispatch had nothing new, just checking my status. I reported what I'd found, disturbed ground, possible trespassing, and asked them to pull records on the Parker lot. As I spoke, I heard another thud, closer this time, back toward the lot. I turned, moving quickly but quietly, my eyes scanning the trees. When I reached the open lot again, it was empty, but the air felt different, like the pressure before a storm. I stood there listening and caught a faint rustle from the far side of the fence, near the ditch. I moved toward it, my flashlight beam cutting through the glare, but found nothing. No footprints, no broken weeds, just that lingering smell. I drove back to the station, filed a report, and tried to shake it off. That night, lying in my apartment, the ceiling fan clicking above me, I kept replaying the lot in my head, the smooth dirt, the thud, the way the shadows seemed to shift just out of sight. I told myself it was nothing, maybe kids or a homeless guy passing through, but sleep didn't come easy. The next day, I went back with Carl, who grumbled about the heat in his ankle but came along anyway. We walked the lot, and I showed him the disturbed patches. He squinted at the ground, chewed his toothpick, and said it looked like nothing, maybe rain or animals. The clearing in the woods was still there, but the dirt looked less fresh, like it had settled overnight. Carl didn't see anything worth worrying about, but I caught him glancing over his shoulder as we left. Mrs. Ellison called again a few days later, saying the thumping was back, louder now, and she'd seen that shadow again, moving near the fence. I went out alone, late in the afternoon, the sky turning bruise purple with an approaching storm. The lot was the same, empty, quiet, but that earthy smell was stronger, and the disturbed patches looked fresher, like someone had been back. I checked the clearing again, and this time there was a small pile of dirt in the center, maybe a foot high, like it had been scooped and left there. No shovel, no tracks, just the pile, neat and deliberate. I started driving by the lot on every shift, sometimes twice a night, telling myself I was just being thorough. But I'd slow down, stare into the shadows, half expecting to see something move. One night, I stopped my cruiser and got out, the air cool for once, the cicadas silent. I stood at the edge of the lot, flashlight off, just listening. That's when I heard it, a low, steady thump, like a heartbeat, coming from the direction of the clearing. I didn't go in. My hands were shaking too hard to hold the flashlight steady, and every instinct told me to get back in the car. I didn't tell Carl about that night. I didn't write it up. Mrs. Ellison stopped calling a week later, and when I checked on her, her neighbor said she'd gone to her daughter's in Columbus, couldn't stand the quiet anymore. The lot's still there, still empty, as far as anyone knows. I keep patrolling, keep doing my job, but I avoid that lane now. Take the long way around. Sometimes, on night shifts, I hear that thump again. Faint, like it's carried on the wind. I tell myself it's just my head, but I don't believe it. The radio hissed just after 11 p.m., cutting through the low hum of the patrol car's engine as I cruised through Akron's east side. My partner, Eddie, sat beside me, sipping coffee from his thermos, the steam curling in the dim glow of the dashboard. We'd been working the night shift together for 3 years, long enough to know each other's quirks, his bad jokes, my habit of double-checking my duty belt. The call from dispatch was routine. A woman in a low-rise apartment building reported loud noises from the unit next door, which was supposed to be empty. She sounded shaken, describing bangs and thumps like someone moving furniture. Eddie rolled his eyes, figuring it was just another overreacting neighbor, but I took it seriously. I'd grown up in Cleveland's tougher neighborhoods, where every odd sound could mean trouble, and 5 years on the force hadn't dulled that instinct. We pulled up to Maple Grove Apartments, a tired brick building with a neon sign flickering out front. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of cigarette smoke and wet asphalt from an earlier rain. My flashlight beam caught the cracked sidewalk as we walked to the lobby, the linoleum sticky under my boots. The caller, Mrs. Larson, met us on the 3rd floor, her door cracked open, her face pale under a messy bun. She said the noises came from 3B, the vacant unit next to hers. The landlord had told her it had been empty for months, no tenants since the last guy moved out. The banging started around 10 p.m., she said, heavy and deliberate, like someone dragging something across the floor. She hadn't seen anyone, didn't want to check herself, and I could see the worry in her tight grip on her sweater. We knocked on 3B's door, the sound sharp in the quiet hallway. Nothing. Eddie tried the handle. Locked. I pressed my ear to the door, expecting to hear something, but it was silent, just the faint hum of pipes in the walls. We called the landlord, a gruff guy named Tom who showed up 15 minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He unlocked the door, and we stepped inside. The apartment was bare, no furniture, no curtains, just scuffed hardwood and a stale smell, like dust and old paint. My flashlight swept the rooms, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, all empty. No signs of a break-in, no marks on the doorframe, no footprints in the thin dust. Eddie checked the windows, all locked tight. I asked Mrs. Larson if she'd heard anything else, like voices or footsteps, but she shook her head, looking almost embarrassed. We told her to call if it happened again, and she nodded, closing her door with a soft click. Back in the car, Eddie chuckled, saying it was probably the building's old bones creaking. I wasn't convinced. My dad, a mechanic who'd worked late shifts, always told me to trust my gut when something felt wrong, and 3B felt wrong. Not dangerous, just off, like the air was too still. I thought about my sister, Jenna, back in Cleveland, who'd always worried about me being a cop. She'd call after every big case, asking if I was okay, if the job was worth it. I hadn't talked to her in weeks, too caught up in patrols and paperwork. Maybe that's why I was on edge. Too many late nights, too little sleep. We moved on to other calls, a drunk guy yelling downtown, a lost dog report. But I kept thinking about that empty apartment, the way it seemed to watch us. The next night, the call came again. Same time, same story. Mrs. Larson sounded more anxious, saying the noises were louder, more insistent, like someone was pounding on the walls. Eddie was off, picking up a day shift for a buddy, so I went alone. I didn't love solo calls, but I'd done them before, mostly noise complaints or minor disputes. I parked under the same flickering streetlight, the neon sign buzzing faintly. The lobby smelled of mildew now, the air heavier than the night before. I took the stairs to the 3rd floor, my boots echoing in the empty stairwell. Mrs. Larson was waiting, her door ajar, her eyes darting to 3B. She said the banging started at 10 again, but this time she swore she heard a low hum, like someone muttering under their breath. She hadn't looked out, didn't want to know, and I couldn't blame her. I knocked on 3B's door, my flashlight beam steady on the faded paint. No answer. The handle was locked, same as before. The landlord wasn't picking up, probably asleep, so I radioed dispatch to keep trying. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath. At first nothing, just the building's low hum, then a single thump, sharp and heavy, like a chair hitting the floor. My heart jumped, and I stepped back, my hand brushing my sidearm. I called out, identifying myself as police, but got no response. The hallway was silent, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. I told Mrs. Larson to stay inside, lock her door, and she nodded, her face pale as she shut herself in. I had a skeleton key for basic locks, standard for wellness checks, so I decided to use it. The lock clicked open, the door creaking as it swung inward, releasing a puff of stale air. The apartment looked identical to last night, empty, dim, the hardwood reflecting my flashlight's beam. I checked the kitchen, bare counters, closed cabinets. The bedroom, empty, no closet doors to hide behind. The bathroom, just a chipped sink and a shower with a stained curtain. No signs of anyone, no scuff marks, no dust disturbed. But the air felt thick, like it was pressing against my skin, and my flashlight beam seemed weaker, the shadows deeper. I stood in the living room listening, but the thump didn't come again. Just silence, heavy and wrong. Then I heard it, a soft scrape, like a shoe dragging across wood, coming from the bedroom I'd just checked. My pulse spiked, and I turned, flashlight raised, my other hand hovering over my sidearm. The bedroom was still empty, but the sound came again, slow and deliberate, like someone testing the floor. I called out again, my voice sharp, but got nothing. I moved toward the bedroom, my boots loud against the hardwood, and swept the light across the walls. The scrape stopped, replaced by a faint tap, like a knuckle against glass. It came from the window, but when I checked, it was locked, the glass clean. No one outside. The street below was empty, just the streetlights flicker and the glint of wet asphalt. I backed out, locking the door behind me. My radio crackled, dispatch saying the landlord was unavailable but they'd keep trying. I told Mrs. Larson I found nothing, to call if it happened again, but she looked unconvinced, her eyes fixed on 3B's door. Back in the patrol car, I sat for a moment, the engine idling, my hands gripping the wheel. I thought about my dad's advice, about trusting my instincts, but I had nothing to go on, just a sound, a feeling, and an empty apartment. I thought about Jenna, how she'd laugh if I told her I got spooked by a noise complaint. She'd always been the brave one, the one who'd sneak out at night as a kid, daring me to follow. I hadn't called her in too long, and the thought of her worrying made my chest tight. The next day, I checked the building's records at the station. Unit 3B had been vacant for 4 months, the last tenant leaving after a job transfer. No criminal reports, no break-ins, nothing unusual. I called Mrs. Larson to follow up, but she said the noises stopped after that night, like a switch had been flipped. She sounded relieved, but there was an edge to her voice, like she didn't quite believe it was over. I asked Eddie about it when he got back, but he just shrugged, saying old apartments make all kinds of noises, especially in the fall when the temperature shifts. He was probably right, but I couldn't shake the memory of that scrape, the tap on the glass. I thought about my ex-girlfriend Lisa, who'd moved out last year because she hated how the job made me jumpy, always checking the locks, always on edge. Maybe she had a point, but I'd been a cop too long to ignore my gut. I went back to my routine, patrols, paperwork, the usual grind. Mrs. Larson didn't call again, and I didn't push it. But when I drive by Maple Grove now, I glance at the 3rd floor, at the dark windows of 3B. I tell myself it was nothing, just an old building settling, maybe a squatter who moved on. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I'll hear a faint tap, like a knuckle on glass, and I'll check the windows, just to be sure. They're always locked, the street outside empty, but I keep my flashlight close and I don't linger in the dark too long. The pine needles crunched under my boots as I stepped out of my truck, the cool Oregon air sharp with the scent of damp earth and resin. I'd moved to this cabana just outside Bend a month ago, after 25 years as a detective in a small coastal town called Newport. Retirement was supposed to be my escape, a way to leave behind the weight of cases that clung like damp clothes after a storm. But sleep was a stranger now. Insomnia had me trapped. My nights spent pacing the creaky floorboards of the cabana, the silence broken only by the wind rattling the windows or the distant howl of a coyote. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Lily, a 9-year-old girl from a 2008 case, found dead in an alley behind a diner, her small body tucked under a tarp, eyes wide open, hair tangled with leaves and dirt. We never found her killer, never even got a solid lead. That failure followed me like a shadow, heavier now in the quiet of retirement, a constant reminder of the one case I couldn't close. The cabin was small, just a bedroom with a sagging mattress, a living area with a worn couch and a wood stove, and a kitchen that looked out over a dense pine forest. I'd bought it cheap, hoping the solitude would help me reset, maybe give me a chance to rebuild the bridge to my daughter Claire, who lived in Portland. She hadn't spoken to me much since her teens, blaming me for missing her birthdays, her high school graduation, all because I was chasing cases like Lily's. I'd call her sometimes, leave voicemails she rarely answered, promising to visit, to be the father she deserved. But the job had carved out too much of me, left me with nothing but memories, and a desk cluttered with old case files I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Lily's file was there, its edges worn from years of handling, photos and reports I'd pore over at night, searching for something, anything I'd missed. The diner's neon sign, the tarp's frayed edge, Lily's missing shoe. Every detail was burned into my mind, as vivid now as it was 17 years ago. One night, around 3 a.m., I was on the couch, the TV flickering with an old western, the volume low to keep my mind from wandering back to Newport. A soft tap came from the bedroom window, like a twig brushing the glass in the wind. I ignored it at first, figuring it was the forest, always alive with small sounds, branches snapping, animals scurrying. But it came again, sharper, deliberate, like a finger tapping once, then stopping. My heart gave a quick thud, an old instinct from the job kicking in. I grabbed my flashlight, a heavy mag light from my detective days, and stepped outside, the cold biting my hands, the air thick with the scent of pine and frost. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the grass, the pines swaying gently in the breeze. I swept the beam over the yard, the forest's edge, but found nothing. No branches, no animals, just the faint rustle of leaves. The window was clean, no marks, no smudges, its frame weathered but intact. Back inside, I locked the door, the bolts click loud in the quiet, and told myself it was nothing, just the cabana settling into the night. But my pulse stayed high, my hands unsteady as I set the flashlight down. The next night, it happened again. I was in bed, staring at the wooden beams above, my eyes heavy but refusing to close, the insomnia a weight as heavy as the guilt over Lily. The tap came, clearer this time, from the same bedroom window, a single sharp note against the glass. I sat up, my breath catching, and peered through the blinds, the slats cold under my fingers. At the edge of the forest, maybe 40 feet away, stood a small shadow, motionless under the moonlight. It was child-sized, its outlines soft but distinct, like a silhouette cut from black paper, its head tilted slightly as if watching. My stomach twisted, Lily's face flashing in my mind, her wide eyes, her tangled hair, the way she'd looked in that alley. I grabbed the flashlight and went outside, my boots sinking into the damp earth, the air sharp with the smell of wet pine. The shadow was gone, the forest empty. No tracks in the soft ground, no broken twigs. I stood there, my beam sweeping the trees, my pulse loud in my ears, the cold seeping through my jacket. Back inside, I noticed my desk drawer was slightly ajar, a pen I kept there now lying on the floor, its cap off, the ink tip glinting in the lamplight. I stopped trying to sleep after that. I'd stay up, coffee pot brewing, the TV's hum a weak shield against the silence of the cabana. I checked the locks, the windows, even the attic hatch. Everything was secure, no signs of anyone breaking in. I called the local sheriff's office, asked about prowlers or kids wandering the area, but they had nothing, just a few reports of lost hikers from weeks ago, none near my property. I thought about Claire, how she'd scoff if I told her I was jumping at shadows, how she'd always said I lived in the past, stuck on cases that didn't matter anymore. But Lily's case wasn't just a case. It was the one that broke me, the one that made me question every choice I'd made as a cop, as a father. Back in Newport, I'd interviewed everyone. Diner staff, neighbors, a drifter passing through, even the girls' teachers. Every lead fizzled, every witness saw nothing, and the guilt still gnawed at me, sharper now in the quiet of the cabana, where there was nothing to distract me from it. The taps kept coming, always around 3 a.m., sometimes at the bedroom window, sometimes the kitchen, each one a little louder, a little more deliberate. Each time I'd check, flashlight in hand, my heart pounding, and see that shadow at the forest's edge. Closer now, its shape clearer. A small figure, head tilted, arms limp at its sides. I started checking the perimeter twice a night, my boots leaving deep prints in the soft earth, the flashlight's beam cutting through the dark. One night, I stayed outside longer, sitting on the porch with the light off. The moon's glow enough to see by, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp moss. The tap came, sharp and quick, from the living room window. I turned, my heart slamming against my ribs, and caught a glimpse of something. A small hand, pale and delicate, pressed against the glass for a moment before vanishing. I rushed to the window, my beam shaking, but there was no print, no mark, just the reflection of my own tired face, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. My stomach twisted, my mind screaming it was Lily, though I knew that was impossible. She'd been gone for 17 years. I started keeping my old service revolver closer, locked in its case by the bed, though I hadn't touched it since retiring. I went through Lily's file again, spreading the papers across my desk. Crime scene photos, witness statements, a sketch of the alley behind the diner with its flickering neon sign. I'd memorized every detail, the tarp's frayed edge, the scuff marks on the pavement, Lily's missing shoe, but nothing new jumped out. Yet things kept moving in the cabana. A coffee mug in the sink I didn't use, a chair shifted slightly from the table, a book on the shelf turned upside down. I told myself it was the insomnio, the guilt playing tricks, but my gut, honed by years on the force, said otherwise. I'd been a detective too long to believe in coincidences, too long to ignore the feeling that something was watching me, waiting just beyond the light. I thought about my old partner Tom, who'd worked the case with me. He'd retired a few years before me, moved to Arizona, said the job had taken too much out of him. We'd stayed up late some nights, drinking cheap whiskey, trying to make sense of Lily's case, but we never got anywhere. He'd told me to let it go, said it'd eat me alive if I didn't, and I'd nodded, but I couldn't. Now, in the cabana, it felt like the case was finding me, creeping into the quiet spaces of my new life. I started avoiding the windows at night, keeping the blinds drawn, but the taps persisted, each one a reminder of that alley, of Lily's face. I checked the forest during the day, walking the perimeter with my flashlight, looking for signs, footprints, broken branches, anything. But the ground was always clean, the pines silent except for the wind. One night I set up my phone to record the backyard, propping it on the kitchen counter, hoping to catch something solid, something I could show the sheriff if it came to that. The tap came as usual, sharp against the bedroom window, and I checked outside, my boots sinking into the damp earth, finding nothing but the usual empty forest. When I played the footage back, it showed only darkness, the pines swaying under the moon's glow, no shadow, no hand. But as I watched, I heard a faint sound on the recording, a soft tap, like the one I'd heard, but slower, almost deliberate, followed by a low rustle, like footsteps in leaves. I played it again, my hands cold, and noticed a brief flicker in the corner of the frame, like a small shape moving just out of sight. I froze, my heart loud in my chest, and checked the window again, running my fingers over the glass, cold and smooth, no marks, no prints. I stopped going outside after that, kept the blinds drawn, the TV on to fill the silence, its glow casting shadows that made me jump. I thought about calling Claire, telling her I was sorry for all the years I chose the job over her, for missing the moments that mattered. But how do you explain that you're seeing a dead girl's shadow, that your cabana doesn't feel like yours anymore? I'd left her another voicemail that week, promising to visit, but she hadn't called back, and I didn't push. The sheriff's office offered to do a drive-by, but I waved them off, not wanting to sound like the old cop who'd lost his grip. I pulled Lily's file out less often, trying to distance myself, but her face was still there, every time I closed my eyes, her eyes wide, her hair tangled. The taps haven't stopped, and neither has the shadow, always at the forest's edge, always just out of reach. I don't look out the windows anymore, not when I hear that tap, but I keep the flashlight on the nightstand, the revolver close, and I don't turn off the lights.